Hi, welcome to Land of Confusion. I'm Dave March, the host here, and today we're talking to a man who was yesterday live at the scene of the purported crime of the millennium. So we'll, even though this millennium's only been 20 years. So, and here's my co-host, Don.
I'm Don. And yes, this is crazy. We have you right, the man on the spot here. This is amazing. Great. So
today we're talking to Richard Easton, who was
right into it. Yeah.
So Richard, you went to a little bit of a thing yesterday, something that.
Yes, I went to a surreptitious event with 1.5 million other people in Washington. Drove up with my wife Tuesday night to Old Town Alexandria, which is just across the river. And we were debating whether to take the subway, the metro, or try to take Uber. We certainly heard that in general, getting back, you'd probably be better off with the subway because cell service can be spotty with 1.5 million people. But she ran into a couple of people who were going, a Vietnam War vet from Delaware and his daughter who's an Air Force vet, and a couple from Florida that were staying in our hotel. So we decided, there's some safety in numbers. And the 6 of us went over in Metro to the Federal Triangle. We got there about 10:45 in the morning and just started walking down Constitution Avenue towards the Washington Monument. And my wife stopped and bought a souvenir for a friend, and we lost our friends. But, you could see more and more people. The ambiance was very friendly. You saw police looking very bored, talking with protesters amicably. There was joking going back and forth, but somewhat like a month ago, I went to a protest in Austin, and there were 10 police on bicycles nearby who had absolutely nothing to do. And the Washington Monument, you saw lots of vendors, tons of Trump flags, but everything was very friendly. There, people chatting. You saw all races. If you're going to go into diversity, there was diversity there. I mean, there were Black vendors, but there were Black people among the Trump supporters. Just a cold January day in Washington, mid-40s. Sun came out on and off. Wind kind of whipped up in the afternoon and it started getting colder, but just a real friendly atmosphere. And after a certain point, we walked towards Congress. Alas, or maybe it's a good thing, I missed the excitement there. But we, as you were saying before the program, the Congress Capitol building is enormous.
Right.
We didn't quite go down there. We decided to go up towards the White House. So it kind of took a long way around. Mm-hmm. And we stopped at a Starbucks, tried to use the restroom. They had that blocked, but there were people from a sports bar who were very friendly and let us use their restroom. We walked up to the Occidental restaurant, which is at a hotel right next to the Treasury building. That was closed. It seemed like most of the restaurants, we know the mayor of DC is very unfriendly to Trump. And she was talking about all these crazies that are going to come downtown and, you better board everything up. It was a little unclear to us, though, whether there was a lot of boarding going on right before the election. And then, of course, when Biden appeared to win it, suddenly there were no riots. Trump people were not out rioting. Mm-hmm. What we were doing is we had the temerity of having people look at the election and see clear evidence of massive fraud. But there was no coup. There were no tanks driving down Pennsylvania Avenue. there was something even more dangerous, battalions of attorneys. So, the boarding up was completely useless because Trump's people in general are not violent.
Mhm.
It's like the Tea Party. They left Washington, D.C. cleaner than they found it. So
Often the case.
Yeah.
So at any rate, we couldn't get near the White House. For blocks around, it was boarded up and there were barriers and police cars. But we eventually found BLM Plaza, which is a couple blocks north of the White House. And there, a lot of bicycle cops. I mean, evidently buildings aren't sacred, but BLM, painted on the ground is sacred. And we also saw some maybe 20 somewhat sinister looking BLM people. That's what my guess is. And there was one Trump protester who was hassling them and they were hassling back. But, if that's called violence, boy, TV ratings would be nil. So, but we needed to get back home. So we left sometime on the metro about 1:30 to get back to Alexandria. And we missed the excitement at the Capitol. Whether it was, instigated by Antifa with, videos, who knows what happened, but it looks like, based on one video, like the police gave way and there was a person motioning the protesters to come.
Yeah.
So
Right.
Whether this was like the Kavanaugh hearings where certain Democrats had arranged for this all to happen and then blame it on Trump, that seems possible. I could believe some frustrated Trump people.
Yeah, that's
might
what I
have-
thought. Especially after we heard what happened. There's sounds like 200 people broke the barricade and went inside the building. And one of the people, the guy who's supposedly got in Nancy Pelosi's office, the guy who got a Viking helmet, from what I understand, he is a QAnon guy. And he's kind of remember that libertarian guy who keeps running for president who has wears a boot on his head?
Oh, him.
Yeah,
What's
he's
his
like
name? Come
the
on.
QAnon equivalent of that guy. He's been
That's-
long known in the conspiracy world. That's what you have there. So there
Let's
might
get
have
the
been
name.
a
Let's get the
few
name.
it's just
Vermin Supreme.
Yeah, he's like
Let's get the name.
Washington equivalent of Vermin Supreme. So he shows up to all the protests, and that's what he is. So the fact that he got into there, and I'm not saying, it does sound like there's just, local protesters, the same guys who show up to every protest, broke the barricades and got inside. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and there may have been some letting them in. Don't know. I saw one video that appeared to show that. But it's certainly, all this talk about a coup. I saw an interesting interview with a Russian diplomat who was in Moscow in 1991 when they had the coup against Gorbachev.
Yep.
He was talking about the absurdity of that coup, that, you have these T-62, T-72, whatever they are, the current Russian main battle tanks. They were stopping for stoplights.
Right? Yeah, I definitely heard a podcast once where they were talking to a guy who was there, who was part of he was like a colonel involved in the coup. And he's like, they didn't tell us anything. They just told us we were going out on routine military maneuvers. One guy who was actually a CIA agent leaves the embassy, goes down trying to figure out what's going on. He speaks perfectly Russian, and he tells the local, this battalion of troops that's moving in, he's actually with the KGB. And that he needs to have talk to their commanding officer because he was just trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Well, you got to figure they didn't have a lot of money. The parking tickets for the tanks, they couldn't have afforded that. But
right.
Obviously that had its Keystone Cops aspects, but this is not a coup.
No,
These were a few protesters coming to in a way I would not approve of, but hassle Congress.
Yeah.
They didn't steal, they didn't take over the radio stations. They, there was,
I understand they respected the velvet ropes.
There's a report of like one guy, probably an Antifa or some sort of protester who snuck in, started to smash a window, and a couple MAGA hat guys came over and said, "What the hell are you doing?"
Yeah, I mean, we're having things redefined by the week. It's like the ACB hearings where they had to redefine words. Well, we're having the word coup redefined.
Right.
And again, I've had disputes with people on Ricochet where I'm saying, battalions of attorneys is not a coup. Disagreeing and trying to present evidence of massive voter fraud is not trying to overturn the election. It's trying to have a fair election.
Right.
Exactly.
Let's face it. The sick humor now will be, how long will it be before they suddenly decide Biden is incompetent and the media will have to pretend to be surprised? I mean, we've been screaming for 2 years that Biden doesn't have all his marbles. It's been readily available, the evidence, and similar to Twitter, censoring the Hunter Biden story. Now they're going to have to flip on their heads and pretend that it's a huge shock that Slow Joe doesn't,
Well, look, as soon as he was elected and they suddenly discovered the Hunter Biden computer was suddenly a story out of nowhere. Like, oh yeah, by the way, he's being investigated by the FBI. I'm like, wow, you only noticed that on November 4th. That's weird.
Well, there was when the Soviet Union went through a string of chairmans, you had Brezhnev died, then you had Andropov, then you had Chernenko. Well, there's also a huge world chess championship going on between Karpov and Kasparov. And Karpov was initially far ahead, and then he started collapsing. And the joke was that Karpov looked worse than Chernenko at the end of the match. So
Little Soviet humor for you there.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing reminds me of the fall of the Soviet Union. I will tell you that. Just watching all the Republican and Democrat leadership just having to give away to young people who are not going to happen. Like, we spent the last how many years doing a Ruth Bader Ginsburg watch. We're going to be doing a Biden watch. We're going to be doing a McConnell watch. We're going to be doing a Nancy Pelosi watch, a Steny Hoyer watch. All these people are in their 80s. Like,
well, and people on Twitter were saying, gee, if McConnell wanted to lose the 2 Senate seats in Georgia, he'd have difficulty doing more effective job than what he did do. The huge middle finger to the American taxpayer that they decided to fund every foreign cause imaginable and give people $600. I mean, it's like a relative of mine.
$1.5 billion to Egypt, $200 million to Israeli missile defense, $10 million to gender studies in Pakistan. I'm like, oh my God.
It's kind of like my rich relative that towards the end of her life suddenly wasn't so rich and wanted to buy a new property. And guess what? The feds are bankrupt. They're spending money, like they're locking down people, and you can't print enough money to make it right. You at a certain point you need production, and we have people like AOC that just, I mean, sometimes people are deliberately don't want to understand certain things that are unfortunate ideologically. But I don't think AOC, I think her confusion is genuine. I don't think she knows jack. And yet
Well,
Nancy Pelosi is afraid of her.
well, AOC just says crazy stuff, right? Just continuously crazy stuff.
Mhm.
And it doesn't even make sense, right? Whether it's it's one of those things, it's not whether it's true or not, it doesn't even make sense.
Mhm.
And she has some PR people that are able to get like oodles of photographs of her at dramatic angles,
Mhm.
and publish, press releases and stuff. But it doesn't look like she's real at all. It just it looks like
You
this is
want
like
to
some facade around her.
if you want to see some angry people, never mind Trump supporters. Go look at the progressive left and how mad they are at AOC. They are all furious at all these the new progressive the squad. They all hate the squad now. And Cenk Uygur, those guys, because they all sold out. As soon as this Congress came in, there's been a large attempt to get Medicare for all passed, led by some people on the progressive left, and they got completely thrown under the bus by AOC and the squad, and they're pissed.
Right, well, I don't think it's ideological. I've said this before. I don't think it's ideological. I think it's simply power and kickbacks.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, and I've told the story. My wife had a job in the first 3 months of 2006. They had various settlements that both the Illinois GOP and the Illinois Democratic Party had to have somebody investigating voter fraud. It was some sort of settlement from, I think, circa 1980. So she did a very thorough job, and she had for her boss a list of precincts she was going to go to on primary day 2006. There were voting machines that were the ancestors of the Dominion voting machines we saw in 2020. There were Venezuelan technicians working on them. There were Venezuelan refugees who were talking to my wife and telling her, this is the type of thing, that crap that Chavez pulled. You don't want this in the US. So my wife had her list of precincts, generally in Chicago, that she was going to go to on primary day. Everything was fine. And then suddenly her boss called her up and said, you're not going there. And she said, well, why? Well, there are at least 3 GOP parties. There's the Illinois GOP, there's the Cook County, which we not so affectionately call Crook County, Illinois, and there's the Chicago GOP. And one of the senior people in the Chicago GOP said, we have an agreement. Now, the only thing I can figure is they would not look, in Chicago, you're not going to elect many Republicans, but you could have a fight between 2 Democrats. That could be a fight over some initiative. And the best I could figure, hey, you Republicans, don't interfere with us, and we'll give you a certain percentage of bonds. You'll make money off that. It was, it was low-grade Republican corruption. And it appears, it's what Sidney Powell said, some of the Republicans, hey, they got elected through voting fraud. They don't want this investigated, and they don't really care who got the election for president, as long as you don't look too closely at what they did.
Solid point. Solid point right there.
Yep. That's I'm very afraid what's happened. From what I'm hearing, though, is that this time they feel that at the state levels that the Democrats really broke the covenant in order to get rid of Trump. And because they were fine, especially when it's always at the margin, you could steal a percentage point here or there, whatever. But because they had to steal 15% in Pennsylvania, you had to steal 10% in Michigan, you had to steal huge margins in order to win this. and it just
30, I'm
exposed
going to guess 30 million votes.
Yeah, I have no idea exactly the number was, but there's a lot, and it's just like my understanding. The state legislatures in most of the states that these battleground states are Republicans, and they're just going to crack down. They
Well,
can't
and of
save
course,
Trump, but they will save 2022 and 2024. They're going to bring
the
it
other
Texas
thing
style.
though is, the Constitution makes it very clear that short of things like the amendments that women have the right to vote, et cetera, that the state legislature sets the standards for the election.
Yeah.
They broke that in Pennsylvania. They broke that in Wisconsin. And our courts, I mean, do we have a federal constitution or not? This is not penumbrous. This is specific statute,
Yep.
parts of the
Well, they
Constitution.
kept saying you had no standing, and that might be great for the big conservative Inc. guys and people at National Review and saying, "Oh, well, they don't have standing." I mean, but like regular Americans do not look at that and say, "You're telling me I can't get redress through the courts? Are you? I guess you're all corrupt now."
You're saying the Constitution is a dead letter.
Yeah,
And we're
that's
supposed
not going to work.
We're supposed to waive, and various big editors at Ricochet talking about conspiracy theories. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This doesn't have anything to do with debone machines or any of the machines. This is a flagrant breaking of the Constitution to loosen rules, to open the road to massive voter fraud, and Republican Inc. doesn't care.
Well, and I will push back a little bit on that and say that big Republican Inc. But what did we see? We see 7 states send double sets of electors for the first time in 150 years.
Good
you
point.
got the states are control. They have to deal with these people, unlike the people in Washington. And the states or the legislatures do control things. I think, given the responses we saw in this, that will be where we'll get relief eventually. Unfortunately, it hasn't saved the president, but I do believe the president will be a kingmaker in the coming years. I am hearing stories of being primarying every single person who voted against him.
A couple of things. First off, the point about the Constitution, I think, is important. But we've sort of avoided. We've sort of done unconstitutional things in the past, like Obamacare, for instance, and so sort of moving the Overton window about what is acceptable behavior outside the Constitution. It's been growing a lot.
Yeah, but you gotta have respect for John Roberts. How many justices write decisions on both sides of the case?
Right. Well, he evolved just like Obama on gay marriage.
He evolved real fast in a couple of weeks.
And the other thing is that the thing I posted from Scott Adams, I don't know if you saw it, where he said that Scott Adams said, like, the states have let us down here. The most important thing the states have to do, the foundational function of them, is to run elections in a way that is fair and credible and transparent. And the states have let us down here because they are not fair, they are not credible, and they are not transparent.
Right.
And that, in this case, I think I'm going to agree with Scott Adams on this one. I don't always agree with him, but I think he made a really, really good case for this is the big problem. It's such a foundational function of our country, and it happens at the state level, and that's a really big problem. The other thing is, I go over that first, I guess.
I agree with you. And, I don't watch Scott Adams every day, but I've watched a fair bit. And, he talks about, the moment they start taping up windows or forbidding people from reviewing, from poll watching, or send everyone home and start counting the polls, or say a water main burst and sending people out, you have prima facie evidence of voter fraud.
Yeah,
because if they were, to Ricochet's John Gabriel, if there was no significant voter fraud, why aren't the Republicans and Democrats investigating this? You would think that you would want the voters to have confidence. And if this is all conspiracy theories, you wouldn't have courts just quashing it on, no standing.
Yep.
You'd have everybody. You'd have an 1876. Now that, probably resulted in the wrong guy becoming president, but they had a review process. This is all people being told they're stupid and they don't understand the mathematics, but we're not going to look into it.
I'm tired of being told by people who I don't understand the mathematics, by people who don't know anything about elections. That's the thing that always gets me. The fact is that everyone in Ricochet, they've never run an election. They're reporters or academics. How many times have they actually been in a poll booth running an election? Zero. I've done it. I'm like a shitty campaign manager. I'm a tiny like RNC chair equivalent in Canada, but I'm in a provincial president. I'm in a federal I'm currently the federal riding president. I've run nominations. I've done electoral searches. I've manned poll booths. I met my girlfriend scrutineering. Everything. I know way more about elections than John Yoo does because he just goes and teaches about it.
Yeah. Well,
another issue appears to be that you can't be arrested for election fraud. They won't press charges.
Mm-hmm.
If the attorney general or whoever is sufficiently crooked, they will not press charges.
Mm-hmm.
And then they moved the vote counting to larger cities, more centralized vote counting facilities in larger cities that are like 80% Democrat anyway, and then hired Antifa to count the votes. So this thing is
that was definitely Detroit.
Crooked. The other places too, but Detroit especially.
Mm-hmm.
But this is crooked throughout, and I think the worst part is nobody's doing anything. Nobody's held accountable for it. And the credibility is wallpapered over, wallpapered over by the press just saying, oh, it was clearly a fair vote. And who was it? The Department of DHS?
One of their clowns.
Paper. One of those clowns. If you can get so I guess the theory is that if you can get somebody to validate the fairness of your vote for you, you don't have to do it yourself.
Well, it's kind of like the Hunter Biden story being quashed. Twitter not allowing the New York Post. Basically deactivating for 2 weeks the New York Post. People like John Brennan saying this is a classic example of Russian disinformation, where they have the laptops, they have hundreds and hundreds of emails, which the people who receive the emails say are legit. So you have all these swamp people like Brennan who were involved in 2016, 2017 with Obama and his fake, intelligence.
He spent the last 4 years being told that the 2016 election was stolen by Russian hackers, but the 2020 election is pure as the driven snow.
Yeah. And that, just preposterous things.
Mm-hmm.
And, how did these people rise to the top of agencies? it's people like
Because
Comey.
they can say preposterous things.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
how you do it.
Mueller and Comey. I mean, it's like Andrew McCarthy. He's somehow a sacred cow on Ricochet, constantly being astonished that FISA was abused and saying, "Oh, I know all these people." It's Mark Antony. These are all honorable men. I mean,
look, 50 FBI agents were found taking hundreds of bribes from reporters in 2018. As far as I can tell, none of those FBI agents were prosecuted. I looked it up. The penalty for taking a bribe is 10 years in federal prison.
It's like the Branch Davidians. They could have arrested David Koresh out jogging, but they needed a spectacular. After their initial thing went wrong and a few federal agents were dead and a few Branch Davidians were dead, they could have put barbed wire around the compound with an opening in front, turn the power off and just say the Branch Davidians, you can come out anytime you want. Mm-hmm. But no, they needed a spectacular. So they killed a number of kids. Yeah. And people got slapped on the wrist and then got promoted. Yep. There's no accountability. And again, I'm just astounded at the reaction of so many of the powers that be at Ricochet. They're acting like, pay their bribes going on in the casino. I'm shocked. I mean, yeah,
So I think, I'm being an engineer, I'm always thinking solutions of things.
Yeah.
And it appears to me that we have far more incentive to do the wrong thing than incentive to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And like, if you do the wrong thing, if you cause election fraud, you're responsible for contributing to election fraud, or if you lie about something or stuff, you get some sort of payment for that, whether it's bribery, graft, what have you, and if you do it more spectacular lie, you get more credibility. You're worth more. Your skills at lying are worth more, and if you can get away with it, that's great. And people want to help you get away with it because they can get a percentage also. So, but nobody gets an incentive for doing the right thing. I think there needs to be some sort of reward. I'm talking maybe some raw cash to attorney generals who will actually press charges on something. That may be it. We may have to bribe people to press charges. I mean, that's wrong, but maybe it's the only way.
And only pay. I mean, I've heard that in Taiwan, after the voting is done at each precinct, they hold up in sequence every ballot. They video every ballot being counted. There are you gotta crack down on absentee ballots. But you also gotta make it so that, I mean, my wife was an election judge in Chicago in 2000. And she said they were one off on the overall count. And one of the Democratic judges said, "Oh, let's just throw out a ballot." And my wife said, "No, we're going to have a tally that reconciles." Yeah. And I remember I was in California. No, I was in Seattle for a court case that day. But she was good friend. Oh. Rosenberg, who was a legend in Chicago radio. And when she got out, she called Milt and said, "How's the election going?" And he says, "Oh, it's a catastrophe. They've called Florida for Gore and it's all over." So she went over to WGN studios, and they were, working through every possible scenario. But I mean, that was a case, obviously, where the media pretended that there wasn't a thing known as the Florida Panhandle, which was predominantly Republican. And they called Florida for Gore, where the Panhandle hadn't finished voting because it's in Central Time Zone. I mean, the amount of media tricks.
They were eager to do that. They were, they were so eager to do it. They just jumped on it.
Yeah, but I mean, another thing, if you don't have central counting, someone was saying this, you no longer have partial tabulations. You have each precinct has to report the total number of votes. You have, some sort of, what do you call, blockchain technology where each individual can see that their vote tabulated the way it started out. You have no partial tabulations. You have none of Detroit knowing how many votes they need to manufacture. But as you say, the incentives are all the wrong way.
The incentives are all the wrong way. I've posted at least 2 articles on Ricochet about, I thought it would be a really excellent idea for a startup company to use blockchain technology for vote counting machines, and it'd be vote counting system, and that it would provide a public ledger that you can and you can audit, like you said, and actually audit in multiple ways that your vote was counted, and from different angles, right? The people in the voting organization can count and check, and you can count and check, and different angles can make sure, and they all have to agree, otherwise, ding, 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 ding. So and so I thought this would be a great startup idea for a company, because it's easy to do, and we have lots of sales. We have 3,000 counties in this country, and each one needs that. And now I'd like to make an addendum to that proposal, that we should offer a second model.
Well, what's that?
Because apparently there's no market for fair, transparent votes.
There's plenty of places.
There's no market for that. So we have a second model. And the second model, you can dial up exactly how much you want, and you can offer them both.
Okay. Well, when you retire, Don, let's sit down and figure out a way to get that business off the ground. I think we can make a lot of money.
No, I can do it. I still take me a long time. Need some proper engineers who know blockchain. I'm not much of an expert in that area.
Yeah.
Well, but yeah, it's so easy to count votes. This should not be a problem. This should not be a problem.
And it isn't. If you look at Florida, 20 years ago, they were in this big mess, and now they had their election done in 3 hours.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's another thing. California took 4 weeks.
Yeah, and New York as well.
There's still some congressional districts. I mean, let's face it, in 2008, 2009, Al Franken stealing the Senate seat in Minnesota, that wasn't decided until around June. That's when Obama suddenly had 60 votes and could ram anything through. He had that magic time. Of course, he didn't know Kennedy was going to die. And then, the candidate, the Massachusetts Democrat, was going to be so bad, she was going to lose the Senate seat in Massachusetts. So he had, 6 months. And then, of course, for Obamacare, they had to do some quick magic, so that suddenly having 59 votes.
And here we are.
They still had it.
2020, and Obamacare is pretty much a figment of imagination now.
Yeah. Well, they're they'll
But why
try
don't we
to come
talk
up
to
with.
you? We got maybe 20, 30 minutes here left, Richard. Maybe we should talk about you.
Okay.
Yeah, that was kind of the point of the whole podcast.
Yeah.
It's a video cast, whatever.
So I see we were actually talking a little bit before the show started that you were there in '68 as a kid seeing the results. So I take it you grew up in the DC area?
Yes, yes. My dad worked on the early space program. We're talking about work at home. He used to bring Vanguard 1, which is the fourth satellite launched and the oldest one still up there. He used to bring it home and tinker with it on our dining room table. I got a picture of me next to it about 2 weeks before it was launched. So
I'm sure Don would like to hear
dining
about
room
this.
table. It had to be the dining room table.
yes. And he's got a picture of our 5 kids around it at the picnic table. And then
move the toaster to the side. Make room for this.
Yeah. Well, and it was launched on St. Patrick's Day, 1958, and I'm wearing a red coat. It kind of looks like a late winter day in Washington, D.C. So, and then he went from that to invent GPS, and the fights over who did what have made, you think the presidential race is vicious. You have people making up all sorts of stories. So starting in 2006, I began writing about GPS. And again, it's amazing looking at the original documents compared to what people claim today. He got the National Medal of Technology from President Bush in 2006. I wrote my first article that year. I co-author of a history of GPS called GPS Declassified that was published in 2013.
And we'll be adding a link for that book.
Yeah. I got to meet the man who, John Hyten, who at that point was in charge of Air Force Space Command and now is number 2 guy in the Pentagon. And so met a lot of interesting people along the way, including George Lucas. Lucas his company got a corporate medal the year my dad got a personal medal, and they have a banquet and people are saying, go talk to George Lucas. When are you going to be in the same room as him? So I walked over and I said, I'm working on an article about GPS and I hope to write a book. What should I do? And he says, oh, write the book. He says, an article, they'll edit the heck out of it, but the book, you'll have editorial control. And I thought, well, if I'm George Lucas, publishers are eager to publish my book. Little me, I've got to have some platform before I do that. So I started out with articles, and then my friends had to tease me. I went up to him about 10 o'clock and they said, oh, George Lucas talked to you, and then he left. So I drove him off. But my father was introduced to Lucas.
Talk to George Lucas, you did.
Yeah. But anyway, my dad was introduced to George Lucas as the real Star Wars. So that was fun. And what else?
So it was both articles and a book. Is that right?
Yes. The book was published in 2013, and
we're losing you there a little. Don't hear you anymore, Richard. Richard, we lost sound.
All right, finally got rid of the call.
There we go.
Yeah.
So you're saying about the articles?
I published a number of articles. First one was in 2006, where a number of articles in the Internet Weekly magazine called the Space Review. And I stirred up some controversy. Various big names, I debunked their claims, and had about as much success as I've had on Ricochet talking about voter fraud. So But met some interesting people, GPS historians, and the book, the book's done pretty well for something published by the University of Nebraska Press. So,
Hey, well, there's a long history of publishing a series of articles and then making a book, right? Wasn't Moby Dick like that or something? Or
Wuthering Heights, I believe.
They used to, let's face it, Holmes is, the Sherlock Holmes stories were syndicated in the Strand. Dickens, the Pickwick Papers, the newest chapter.
Yep.
So,
was it the Count of Monte Cristo is like that? He was just writing chapter by chapter until he got it done.
Yeah,
it was published in the newspaper.
It makes a lot of sense. You paid twice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let's face it, for the Strand, the newest Holmes, that's going to sell a lot of extra copies. So,
yeah.
In fact, I'm writing an article right now because 2019, the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering was given, and it's only given to living people. So they ignored my dad. And 2003, this is before I started writing, but the Draper Award was given by the National Academy of Engineering to two people for inventing GPS. And one of the two people didn't understand how GPS worked. So he's the inventor. So, there are a lot of people just looking at these big awards and saying, who are the incompetents or the politicians that are deciding who gets these things? So as a friend of mine who graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1978, he says, boy, you look at the original documents and you look at what people are claiming today, and they're just two completely different things, including, again, people who won hundreds of thousands of dollars for prizes for claims they have that I've debunked. So
was it the guy who invented longitude? He had to get us. He won he proved it. The scientific committee refused to give it to him the prize. It took years for Parliament to give him
John Harrison.
A special act of Parliament to give him the money or.
Yeah, John Harrison with his clocks and then the watch.
Yeah.
And the astronomers wanted it for lunars. So they kept on changing the rules.
Yep.
It's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
So at any rate,
well, you said that he invented longitude. Yeah, he invented longitude.
Well, but at any rate, right now, I'm a couple years away from retirement. I'd like to write a biography of another person I knew, Captain P.V.H. Weems, who taught Charles Lindbergh celestial navigation and taught many of the people. He offered Amelia Earhart. He said, you need a number of things before your round the world trip. You need to know Morse code. You need to be better at X, Y, and Z. And got a courteous letter the next day saying, sorry, but she's taking off in 2 weeks. She doesn't have time. And of course, disappeared near Howland Island in 1937. And it's been, talk about conspiracies. Boy, the number of Earhart theories there are is seemingly infinite.
Mm-hmm. If only she had GPS.
That's true.
True enough. Well, it's still like that airplane that disappeared in the Pacific a few years ago. And I just remember being at work and then coming into a lunchroom and they'd have CNN on and they were talking like, I guess the airplane fell through a black hole. I'm like, what?
Well, and you have the worst marketing campaign ever for Malaysian Airlines, where they said, don't know where you want to go. that got ridiculed, justifiably so. Yeah. So any questions I haven't answered?
Well, let's see what I got here from your biography. I mean, you ended up, you're in an actuary for an insurance operation. How's that going with you?
Good. And, one thing, talking about voting fraud, I used to work for a now it's Big Four accounting firm as an actuary. And you'd always want to look at the piece you didn't review. What's the all other? Frequently, we were just talking about blockchain technology and the ability to check things multiple ways and make sure they all make sense. As an actuary for a Big Four firm, you always wanted to look at the all other because frequently the huge mistakes and the fraud were there. And, just as Scott Adams said, the moment they started taping up the walls, the fix was in.
Yeah.
I mean, that by itself should be reason for throwing out the election.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yes.
Look, I have been involved in elections. I've been in a room where later I found out they stole an election for a friend of mine. Like he was the party wanted him to be the election, so they fixed the books so he would win. I have some suspects of who did it, and of course they're friends of mine, so I don't dare say. But yeah, that was later investigated by the OPP, and no one went to jail over it. But the next leader threw out the election. And my friend had to run again, and he did win, and then he lost the general election. But I mean, like, this is why one of the reasons why it's so personal to me, as I was running a poll during this, and I saw all kinds of crazy fraud happening, not from the party side. Like I was there running the thing, and 3 people came up to me and they're like, well, we're here to like vote. And I'm like, okay, where are you from? And they tell me, and I'm like, you do realize this is not from, you don't live in this riding. They were sold members. And then they're like, well, our candidate bought us our memberships. And I'm like, in Canada, you buy your own membership. You're not allowed to have someone. So you just admitted to me that you're fraudulent. And not to mention, this guy went down. We have like this place called Columbia College in Hamilton. And it's like, it's a technical school, and it's all Chinese, and it's all like Chinese from China. Like, so this guy took busloads of buses, went down to Columbia College and collected hundreds of foreigners and brought them down. And I've never seen so many red passports in my life, because in order to vote, you were supposed to prove you had to have photo ID. So all these Chinese kids brought in their freaking communist Chinese red passports and tried to vote.
Well, it was, suspicion in 2008 that Obama, being from Illinois, that, they bust in thousands of people into Iowa. His surprise victory in the Iowa caucus may well have been fraudulent.
Oh yeah.
So,
Bill Clinton said it. And I'm like, I would think that Bill Clinton thinking that there's election fraud going on, it would be a significant story. Like,
yeah.
But you were saying before about the people checking the votes, and they put the cardboard up. It'd be so trivially easy to have ceiling mounted cameras there.
Oh,
like they had
in Georgia?
Checkout lines everywhere. At any store with a self checkout line has a ceiling camera to watch you purchase your goods. And I mean, I can't believe they don't do that.
Well,
then how can they steal ballots, Don, if they have
right there? Exactly.
Sorry. Well, and of course, put in incentives. You run a clean election, you get more tax money. You have demonstrable fraud, you lose tax money. But of course, they don't want that. It's exactly what you said.
No, I will say this. I watched the Michigan's first state Senate hearing, and there's Republicans there and there's a Democrat there. And in the morning, the Democrat vice chair asked some pointed questions to a former state senator. And he was saying, like, why don't you do a recount? And at the time, I thought he was just giving the guy a hard time. But later, they brought in this person who was basically, we would call him a deputy minister here, but it was like she was a retired former so not the elected Secretary of State, but the senior like civil servant, and she had retired. And he asked her, and she said, because it doesn't matter how much we recount, because we can't look at 72% of the ballots. And he's like, why can't we see 72% of the ballots? Because she's like, we need to send federal marshals to get this these iron tin sealed things, and you'll cause a riot if you send the marshals in to get the ballots, because they won't let us recount them. And it turns out the Democrat says, why is this happening? And she said, well, and this was a big black woman. So she says, in the 30 years I worked at the Michigan elections, we have never had a free and safe election in Detroit in 30 years. And the vice chair, and it's a Democrat vice chair, agreed with her and deferred to his Republican. He's like, I want to have fair, I want to beat the Republicans here fair and square.
Well, and in 2006,
of course, he was from Ann Arbor.
In 2006,
yep,
the alderman who blew the whistle and got the Venezuelan machines pulled out was Ed Burke. He's since had some problems, but he was a Democratic alderman. So occasionally, yes, you do find an honest person who says, I don't want this crap. Yeah.
And that's sort of what I think, that does seem to be some of the stuff that's going to probably come down in the next couple of years. I like I said, I don't think it'll save Trump this time, but like, look,
you got to keep the pressure on.
20 years ago, we wouldn't think we'd have safe and secure elections in Florida. And now Florida is probably not only one of the safest and secure election states in the country, it's also solidly Republican, and it's probably going to be Republican from now on. Like we're all worried about, the blue states taking over. It's like you now have a major battleground, a former battleground state has now moved into the Republican category.
Well, and of course you do wonder. I mean, people talking about in Texas, Elon Musk and SpaceX moving there, and whether that'll turn Texas blue. But there are a certain number of people who are tired of the crap where they move from.
Yeah.
And they may, I remember Victor Davis Hanson talking about one of the Mexican workers he knew who told him, hey, if they turn California into Mexico, I'm moving to Oregon. I moved here to get away from this crap.
Yeah. There's a geostrategist. I watch a lot of videos. Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to do too many since the Bud Light or the coronavirus. I mean, some of my friends call it the Bud Light because they didn't want to get desanctioned on YouTube because YouTube was censoring that. And he says the problem the Democrats have made the decision. They think California is the future, and that's what's happening everywhere. But demographically, the United States, most of the United States is going to look like Iowa, and will remain looking like Iowa for years to come, for the next 20 or 30 years.
I mean, various people have talked about this for some time. Roe v. Wade, the Democrats have a much higher percentage of abortions. So it's, it's like the Orthodox Jews are the most conservative Jews, and they're the ones that are reproducing.
Right. I mean, look, you got to look at Florida. I mean, 35% of Hispanics voted for Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like 35% of Muslims everywhere, except for in certain counties where Biden blew it out. Trump got 35% of the Muslim vote. He doubled the black vote.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, there are a certain percentage of Muslims who don't want Sharia law here. So
that's why they came here.
The pandering from the Democrats turns their stomachs.
Yeah. So the big thing I think for you guys is Republicans in the states need to do, you should send some of your guys up here to talk to our guys. We own the Chinese vote, the conservative movement in Canada. The Chinese vote is now inside. There's a few different reasons for that, mainly because we got most of Canada accepted a lot of Chinese refugees. So that's so they have no love of communism, but they also are on side. Sikhs and Tamils vote conservative in Canada. You guys should make Asian outreach a priority, and it doesn't always happen, from what I can tell. And as my friend said,
and things like Harvard discriminating against Asians.
right?
I mean, they're the people who are against affirmative action because they're being hurt by it.
Yep. So I mean, like, there's a lot of groups out there who will vote conservative. You just have to make, or Republican. You just have to make the effort to outreach to them. And unfortunately, I think it's like the California Republican Party. They just kind of gotten used to resting on their laurels. Though I hear a certain governor might be recalled soon.
Yep, gruesome Newsom.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it'd be nice. Well, we've been talking nearly an hour here, and it's been a pretty good show. Thanks for coming on, Richard. What we should usually end up on a high note. So, what do we got here?
Helium.
Yes. Well, I mean, like, we were talking about right before the show that you were there back at 68, and you saw guys in the army units were on top of the Capitol building armed with machine guns, preparing for like invasions from the riots. And now, so we know it's been a lot worse than 50 miscreants breaking down a door.
Well, and you know, let's face it. I remember a story of a senior reporter in Cairo that when Omar Gaddafi took over Libya, he was sent by Nasser, you know, find out who this guy is. And he came back and he said, it's a catastrophe. He's a true believer. I mean, all right, Biden, Harris are the ticket. Biden is incapable of being president, incapable. At some point, they're going to have to admit it, and there are going to be all sorts of questions. How could you run this guy for president? And Kamala, her stories, I mean, I know she's going to get sympathetic press, but she's not ready for prime time either. I mean, it may lead to a catastrophe. We may have China invade Taiwan, but you know, the Democrats put this team up.
Also, nobody wants her. She was out of the primaries very early.
Well, she was the first one out.
She's stupid. She couldn't figure out, you know, there are a certain number of things before you run that you decide what's your opinion on health insurance. She kept on saying, I'm going to eliminate it, and then backtracking. So she's not very smart. She's from a liberal bubble. And just remember, it was a debate. You know, she accused Biden of being a racist, and then when confronted with it, said, oh, I didn't mean anything. So at a certain point, you know, Trump, rough around the edges, but authentic. And now we have a senile old guy and a woman who's about as inauthentic as they come. You know, these are the people that are going to return comedy to the U.S.
And that's what we call ending on a light.
Yeah. Well, have you guys heard who your new attorney general is going to be? I thought that was funny when I heard.
Oh, is that going to be Cuomo?
No. It's a Merrick Garland.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was just like, oh wow, that's hilarious. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
When I heard.
Yeah.
So that's the high note.
Yeah. So there you go. You got the guy who couldn't be made a Supreme Court justice is going to now be Attorney General. That'll be hilarious.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I want to thank you for coming on, Richard. This has kind of been a great show, and we'll be seeing you on the show, and maybe we'll have you back for a panel in the future.
Yeah, we'd love to hear more about GPS.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send you folks a couple links.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I'm going to get this show up and hopefully we'll have it up for tonight. Okay, thanks for coming out.
Take care, man.
Sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you for having me.
Bye.